Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar titled Building Your Resilient Thinking. I'd like to extend you all a very warm welcome. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Kim Christensen. I'm a peaceful productivity coach, and I work with clients who want to take action towards their goals and feel better in the process. I enable my clients to explore their own self-awareness in a safe space and identify blind spots. I also provide tools to develop self-compassion and self-confidence. With these tools, my clients are able to make empowered and informed choices that serve them and the people around them. I'm often surprised when I think back at the amount of my own transformation that's occurred as a result of coaching. Coaching has given me the tools to increase my self-awareness and identify and honor both my needs and my limits. I am still confronted with adversity on a regular basis, but I now have the self-awareness and emotional management tools to help me navigate it without it completely derailing me. I credit all of my growth and self-resilience to being coached. And that's what we're here to talk to you about today. So for those of you who are in the membership already, you'll find all of the information that I talked to you about today, including the new mindfulness class and the tools around developing resilient thinking in the module 6, mindset and emotional literacy module. For those of you who aren't yet in the membership, you can find more information about the membership on my website, financialwellnesscoach.ca, under the membership tab. Okay, resilience. Resilience is the ability to recover a sense of well-being when faced with adversity. I like to think about resilience as a tree. So the tree, the branches, the leaves, the top of the tree can be buffeted by winds of change, but with a really strong root system, the tree can weather all kinds of different changes without becoming completely uprooted. I also like to think of resilience as a skill, something that we can all develop with a bit of practice. And so today, what I'd like to offer is 3 practices that can help you to develop your resilient thinking and keep you grounded when faced with adversity. So what do we mean by adversity? Adversity can come in the form of a challenge of any kind, whether it's a perceived failure or mistake, whether it's fear, so a challenge that we're internally generating, or a traumatic event or a stressor. Anything that challenges us really, or challenges our expectations, is the way I'm defining adversity for this purpose. And resilience is our ability to navigate those challenges. So typically, we can think about what's our typical response to challenge. It's often described as the fight or flight response. I think of 3 different responses to adversity and challenge. There's the fight. So that feels like frustration, anger, the inclination to blame other people and reject assistance. It's kind of the fight response to adversity. There's the flight response, where we're maybe numbing or denying or avoiding what's going on. Or there's the freeze response, where we feel completely overwhelmed. Our brains are flooding, we're unable to react, and we typically repress emotions. So those are some of the more normal responses to adversity. And I'd like to offer 3 resources today that can help us to navigate challenges without slipping into the fight, flight, or freeze response. So those three resources, and I'll go into more depth about each one, but just for introduction purposes, those three resources are support, attitude, and mindfulness. And these are gifts or resources that we can give ourselves. So the first one around support, what I mean by support in this context is seeking out positive relationships and asking for help when appropriate. I remember a time when I found myself in the hospital with a minor emergency, and I was alone at that time. And just the ability to reach out, recognize that I needed support and reach out to a close friend was instrumental in helping me to manage those difficult emotions of fear and loneliness that came about with that experience. When I talk about support, I also think of self-compassion. So, like many of us, I have a well-developed habit of self-judgment. So for me, practicing self-compassion requires a bit more intention. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. The next resource is attitude. And attitude, I like to think about the beliefs about ourselves and our beliefs about adversity. When I believe that I'm resilient and that I have all of the resources available to me to manage adversity, then I'm able to take the next step. If I believe that I can't handle it, then it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy because I'm more likely to give up. And the last resource that's available to us is mindfulness. Mindfulness is the ability to accept what's happening in the moment and also be present with any difficult emotions that are coming up in the present moment. Mindfulness helps us to have healthy coping skills. And really the key to effective coping is emotional management and the ability to explore other perspectives. Many times when faced with a difficult situation or challenging emotions, it's our instinct to get away or numb those feelings away. But practicing mindfulness can help us to cope with those challenging circumstances and emotions that come about without indulging in self-sabotaging behaviors like procrastination or numbing. So in a little bit more depth, what does support look like? And I mentioned that support can be both practicing self-compassion and asking for help. I feel like our brains are really wired for judgment. We've been conditioned from an evolutionary perspective to scan our environment and make really quick assessments around what's potentially a threat and what's not. And that's why our brains are really wired to make quick assessments and judgment. When we practice self-compassion, we are accepting and normalizing all of our emotional experience, not just the quote unquote positive emotions. I like to think about emotions as our guidance system. I've got this visual of a dashboard in a car. And when I think about emotions as neutral or just messages that are being sent to me with information, then I start to have more compassion for myself and my emotional experience. I understand that fear is a normal and natural response to a perceived threat. And I learn how to move towards the fear instead of pushing it away. I think when we beat up on ourselves for having a normal emotional experience, that's when we feel shame. And that's when we can start to feel out of control. In order to build our shame resilience, Brené Brown, she's a shame researcher and also the author of Daring Greatly, she recommends that we recognize and understand our shame triggers with compassion. So, for example, personal example, I am afraid of flying. But I also tell myself that it's okay for me to be afraid. When I start beating up on myself and telling myself that it's irrational to be afraid of flying, that's when I start to trigger my own shame triggers, and I start to beat up on myself and I feel out of control because now I've layered shame on top of the fear. I really credit my coach with helping me to create the self-awareness to understand when I need support and helping me to understand how to give myself self-compassion. If you're looking for a tool in this area, something that really serves me is I like to tell myself, well, of course you're feeling this way, Kim, and it's okay. The next resource is around our attitude, and it's the practice of self-talk. It's that narrative or that story that we're telling ourselves about ourselves and about our experience of life. So without intention, unintentionally, I can find myself really slipping into a fixation on problems, fixing problems, and blaming others, blaming myself. With more intention, I can cultivate a growth mindset and actively pursue growth for the sake of growth, for building my resilient thinking, and for turning obstacles into opportunities. And I think that's the power of a perspective change. The circumstances, the situation doesn't necessarily have to change, but by changing our perspective around what's going on can really empower us or disempower us, depending on what perspective we're choosing. Also, on the note of self-appreciation, I think sometimes we forget to recognize ourselves, recognize our efforts, and recognize our progress. When we get really fixated on the end goal and the outcome, that's when we forget to really take a moment to look at our progress and celebrate it and recognize ourselves, validate ourselves around that. We can get into the habit of tuning into what's wrong rather than looking for what's going right. It goes back to that predisposition that I was talking about, where our brains are wired to look for negativity and assess threats. So that can lead us to really get locked into what's right and what's wrong. And when we lock ourselves into that perspective, what's right and what's wrong, then we shut down all of the options and choices that are available to us. And it can really lock us in, shut us down. So a question that I like to ask myself when I find myself in that situation is, I'll say something like, is this line of thinking helping me, or is it harming me? Is it blocking me? And again, coaching is a big part of revealing these talk tracks to ourselves, and identifying those blind spots is a big part of self-awareness coaching. And I'll mention that within the Peaceful Productivity membership, included in the price of that membership, you have access to free coaching sessions. So that can be very powerful. The next resource is mindfulness. So as I mentioned earlier, from an evolutionary perspective, we became very sophisticated at scanning our environment and identifying threats and problems. We also became very successful at anticipating what could happen based on our previous experience and problem solving for that. And I said in the podcast, I said, sometimes what will happen is when our brains have a spare moment, like when we're driving and we're just operating in default mode, what happens is our minds will wander out of the present moment and start thinking about solutions for the future or looking back into the past to analyze what went wrong and how we can change it for next time. So we're either in the past or we're in the future. And mindfulness is more about being in that present moment. And sometimes that present moment can be challenging, especially when it's accompanied by uncomfortable feelings, even feeling something as benign as boredom can be a trigger for us to shift out of the present moment and go to the future or the past. I like to think about the benefit of mindfulness as being acceptance, because when we're moving away from the present moment into the future or into the past, or even numbing ourselves from the present moment, we're robbing ourselves of the opportunity for acceptance. And when it comes to peaceful productivity, I think that's the biggest blocker, is resistance. So mindfulness really trains us to become more adept at accepting what's going on, accepting the current situation and accepting some of those more uncomfortable emotions that might be coming up in the present moment. If you're interested in learning more about mindfulness and emotional management, there is a class on this subject in the Peaceful Productivity membership. And it's the entire class is, all classes are included in the price of the monthly membership. One tool that I'll give you right now in terms of emotional management is increasing our emotional awareness. And that tool, my favorite tool, is simply name it to tame it. So when you find yourself faced with an uncomfortable emotion, or you're tempted to numb it or slip into the future or the past, sitting with the emotion and just putting a name to that emotion can be very, very powerful in terms of making friends with those uncomfortable feelings. And in terms of practicing our mindfulness and our emotional management skills, I think that's the real value of pursuing goals. I think I was raised in a culture that was very accomplishment oriented, and we were taught to pursue goals as the roadmap to success. And the challenging part about always chasing accomplishment and chasing a goal, thinking that that will finally bring us to feelings of satisfaction and fulfillment, is that over time we start to realize that we're always chasing and we're never arriving. And the feeling of satisfaction, that feeling of fulfillment, really comes with the practice of mindfulness and emotional management. It doesn't come with accomplishment. And so the value of goals isn't necessarily to accomplish what we've set out to do, although that's a very nice byproduct. It's to give us the opportunity to practice these three practices around building resilient thinking. Those three tools or practices were self-compassion, self-appreciation, and mindfulness. All of these things are included in your Peaceful Productivity membership. So my goal as your coach is to help make these concepts practical and applicable to your life to increase your overall sense of well-being. And so that's why I created the Peaceful Productivity membership, is because the intent of the membership is to take the theoretical and make it practical and applicable. And the way that we do that is through some of those classes that I mentioned earlier. Also included within the membership is access to self-awareness coaching, and Also included are the invitations to all group events. So building a bit of a community around peaceful productivity and well-being. I feel like anyone can learn these tools and develop their resilient thinking. And within the membership, there are multiple opportunities to learn and grow and practice. So in summary, to build our resilient thinking, I've talked about 3 different resources. And those resources are self-compassion, self-appreciation, and mindfulness. I really want to thank you for coming today and for your attention and time. It was my pleasure to spend this time here with you today. I'm going to take a little bit of time after this webinar to answer any questions that you might have. And if something comes up for you after the webinar, please feel free to send me an email, kim@financialwellnesscoach.ca. Thanks, everyone. Take care.